Hello, everyone, and welcome back for more biotechnology. So, at this point, I think we have a pretty good idea of what a biotech company does, but let's talk a little bit about the business side of biotech. So, let's talk about how biotech companies select what kind of products that they manufacture. So, you're going to see here that it's not necessarily all science related, there is definitely a business aspect of things. So, most biotech companies aren't going to essentially be a jack of all trades. A lot of the smaller biotech companies in particular are going to basically stick to what they're good at. They specialize in one particular type of product. It's going to be really the very, very big biotech companies like Genentech and the like that are going to do all kinds of different things, right? So let's say that a biotech company, a rather small one, let's say that they manufacture and sell the recombinant insulin that they make. So we talked about how you could possibly get bacteria to make a lot of insulin for you. So if they already have the setup for making and purifying recombinant insulin, then really they should be pretty easily set up to manufacture and sell all kinds of other recombinant proteins as well. The only real difference between making recombinant insulin and making recombinant something else is just the gene that you decide to isolate, stick into a vector, and introduce to whichever cell you're going to manipulate into making it. All the other methods and reagents or equipment are going to largely be the same. So that's kind of the idea. If you have a very small biotech company, you develop a particular methodology that you know works for you, and then you try to see how far you can kind of stretch that out. So the idea there is that focusing on one particular product and product area, really that's going to end up being a lot more efficient and economical rather than overextending yourself and trying to stretch your resources out too much in trying to, I guess, get into a market that your company's not really familiar with. You can lose a lot of money that way, and then if that ends up happening, your biotech company is no more and a lot of people are out of work. So a lot of biotech companies, especially the small ones, are not really crazy about getting into product areas that they are not really familiar with or not prepared to engage in. Now, let's say you're at a biotech company and you have some idea for a new product, maybe something that is congruent or compatible with what your biotech company already does. So there are a couple of different places that new ideas can come from. So you could, say, be looking through the literature, you could be reading scientific manuscripts or reports from conferences or things of that nature, and you could just get a really good idea. You could see that some other biotech company or some academic lab is doing something that's really neat, something that you feel your biotech company could really work with. Okay, you could get an idea that way. Or you could get some unexpected results from your ongoing experiments, maybe a result that you weren't necessarily expecting, but it kind of pushes you in a different direction and maybe leads you down a new path. Or it could just be pure serendipity. It could literally just be providence or luck or whatever you want to call it. And funnily enough, there is a very good historical example of this. So this gentleman down here in the bottom left, his name was Kary Mullis. He actually just passed away in the last year. So he is famous. He is a Nobel Prize winner because he invented a technique called polymerase chain reaction. So PCR is a method of taking a very small amount of DNA and amplifying it to make many, 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 many copies of that one particular stretch of DNA. The idea here of how he came about of inventing PCR is that, as the story goes, he was driving through the redwood forest, so that's fairly close by. He was working at the University of Stanford at the time. He was driving at night through the redwood forest under the influence of LSD, as one did at the time in the 70s, I suppose. So he was just driving through the redwood forest and just came up with the idea of using a DNA polymerase enzyme that comes from a bacterium that lives at a fairly high temperature, around 95 degrees Celsius. He came up with the idea of taking that enzyme and getting it to amplify stretches of DNA with primers and things that we're going to talk about much later in the semester. So really wild story about how he came up with one of the most important lab and biotechnology techniques in any of our lifetimes. So great new ideas literally can come through pure serendipity, as we say. Okay, so once you've got this idea, what's it going to take to get that to market? Obviously, you're going to have to go through the whole manufacture process. You're going to have to do all sorts of things that we're going to talk about here. So this research and development process may actually take quite a while. Just because you have a great idea today doesn't mean it's going to go to market tomorrow or even in the next week or month or year. So these things tend to take time. One of the most important things that you have to demonstrate is that your product is safe and effective, right? So this is what you commonly hear in the news about clinical trials. So if you are producing some type of pharmaceutical drug, something that people are going to put into their bodies, like recombinant insulin, for example, your product has to go through a set of clinical trials, and these are usually overseen by the Food and Drug Administration. So you can't sell your product, you can't market your product until your product has gone through the necessary clinical trials to not only show safety but efficacy. So FDA approval, this can be kind of aggravating sometimes. It can take several years at least. So because a biotech company doesn't want to necessarily sit on their hands for 2 years waiting for a product to come to market, a biotech company is usually going to try to have several drugs or products in the pipeline, as we call it, at any given time. You don't want them to all be on the same time frame of getting out of the pipeline at the same time. You want to kind of spread them out so that one product comes out of the pipeline every so often. That's going to be how you kind of make bank in that case. You don't want to invest a whole lot of capital into several products that are all going into the pipeline at the same time. You're going to have to wait a long time to see any potential payoff on all of those at once. But if you spread them out, you can get one product through the pipeline, start marketing, start making it, manufacturing it, marketing it, and selling it, making a profit off of that, and then that profit you get from that can help to defray the investment that you made in products that are still in the pipeline. So things to consider, factors to consider for a biotech company before letting a product get too deep into the pipeline is things like, how profitable is this going to be for us? Are we going to be able to make money off of this? You should have to consider things like, how much is it going to cost to make this and manufacture it? And obviously that'll be a factor in kind of what sort of markup you put on it when you decide to sell it. How marketable is the product? Are people going to want this? Are people going to buy this? So there's all sorts of really non-scientific things that have to be considered before a biotech product really gets too far into the pipeline. So oftentimes if a biotech company decides that, okay, this product has been in the pipeline for 6 months, we don't really like the projections we're seeing, we don't feel like we're going to make much money off of this, a biotech company may decide to pull a product from the pipeline, basically just cancel the whole project before they get really too deep in the hole on investment capital and things of that nature. So they try to minimize their loss by taking a product out of the pipeline before it really starts to hurt them. And like I said, usually that's going to be the thing that happens early on. If a product fails its way through the pipeline at a later stage, it's usually going to be because it didn't make its way all the way through the clinical trials. Either the product was shown to not be effective in human subjects, or it was shown to not be safe. Maybe the FDA didn't like some of the side effects that the product causes. So like I said, when products do not make it through the pipeline for a variety of reasons, whether it's because they didn't make it through the clinical trials or something else, that's not good, especially if you don't get through the pipeline late in the process. So investors and shareholders in your biotech company are going to stand to lose quite a lot of their initial financial investment, and that's not good. That's not good business for a biotech company, especially a very small one. So with the pipeline, there is inherent risk involved. You have to be prepared for products in the pipeline to possibly not make it out through the other side. So it's for that reason that I mentioned that a lot of biotech companies try to limit how many products they have in the pipeline at any given time, because the more products you put into the pipeline, the more initial investment comes through there, and the possibility that more and more of that investment will not see a return. But in spite of all that, in spite of those difficulties that should hopefully not discourage you at all, the FDA has actually been approving more and more drugs and more products each and every year. So you can see kind of this time frame histogram. As the FDA has gone on through history, more and more products do get approved each year. But in spite of that, like I said, there is some kind of grumbling, some groaning, some criticism of the FDA in that they really take too long to get things to market. They take too long to approve things for market use. And you kind of see some of that in today's age as I'm recording this in August of 2020 with things like COVID-19 medications and vaccines. Obviously, for all of our sakes, we'd like to see those things make it to market sooner rather than later, but the FDA will push back on that and basically try to follow their protocols to the letter, which, again, that's the sort of thing that makes things take time. But you don't want to speed these things up too much, because then you might get an ineffective or unsafe product to market. So those are all things to consider. So in addition to the FDA, another thing that can slow down approval is if something like the Environmental Protection Agency or the USDA, if they have to get involved, if your biotech product is something that can affect the environment or things of that nature, they may get involved with their own testing and their own rules and regulation, and that can cause things to slow down as well. All right, so that is going to do it for this particular video. Join us next time, and we will start talking about the scientific method in a biotechnology setting. So I hope you'll join us, and I will see you next time.